Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Donna Katsopoulos, and I'm honored to serve as the Secretary General for Senior Women Academic Administrators of Canada. If you're not familiar with Senior Women Academic Administrators of Canada, since 1987, our primary purpose is the promotion of female leadership in Canadian universities, colleges, Indigenous, and polytechnical institutes. And we do this through a variety of ways. We provide professional development opportunities such as this webinar today, mentorship programs, recognition awards, networking, and substantial efforts towards promoting equity, diversity, and inclusion. Our organization is pleased to welcome you to this webinar, and we're particularly pleased to partner with the Centre for Crisis and Risk Communication. In today's webinar, we'll be exploring communicating in high-stress situations, a common context that has prevailed across most of our organizations in unprecedented ways in the recent past and still today. At the conclusion of the presentation, we'll have an opportunity for confidential questions that will be addressed by our speakers. During the presentation, only the active speakers will have their videos visible. I will now introduce Mr. Jeff Angel, who will talk more about the Centre and introduce his colleagues who are joining him here today. Jeff?
Hi, Donna. Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak to the senior women academia and leadership. You've got one of the best acronyms I've heard in a long time, SWAAC. So it is a great honor and a privilege to be here to present to such leadership across the country. I know from the registration, we've got people all the way from Vancouver Island to St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. So super excited to be here. Thank you for reaching out, Donna. Thank you for the work that you did in helping us prepare for the presentation. It's greatly appreciated. So I want to say hello, tell you a little bit about the Center for Crisis and Risk Communications and who we are. As Donna said, my name is Jeff Angel. I'm a graduate of the University of Western Ontario. I've got a degree in political science. I spent a couple of years in politics. I worked for one prime minister and a couple prime ministers, and then I went to work in the airline industry for about 10 years. I headed up corporate communications for Canadian Airlines, and then I was a senior vice president communications for British Airways in New York, responsible for North and South America. I handled the crash of Concorde for British Airways, her subsequent relaunch, and her retirement. I lived in New York through September 11th. So for better, for worse, I've got some crisis experience in my background. Today, I'm going to be presenting with my colleague, Celine Richter. Celine's a graduate of the University of Ottawa. She's a BA in communications. She's got in-depth experience in communications. She headed up communications for Canada's largest Catholic health agency, that's Covenant Health. She was also heading up communications for the Alberta Motor Association. She is on the International Association of Business Communicators Trends Watch Task Force, and she's also a Blue Ribbon panelist with IABC for their Gold Quill Awards, their prestigious Gold Quill Awards. Along with us today is also my colleague, Benjamin Morgan. Ben is going to be running the presentation. So Celine and I will be delivering it. Ben will be running the presentation. Ben has his master's in communications from Royal Roads University. He actually spent the first 15 years of his career as a paramedic. So he has seen real life on the ground crisis. He then moved into communications. He left his supervisor position with the paramedics and headed up crisis communications for the city of Calgary. You may recall that we had tremendous floods here in the city of Calgary in Alberta during 2015. Ben was part of the team that led that response. And also in 2016, the city lent him to Fort McMurray to help respond to the forest fires up there that engulfed the town of Fort McMurray and the surrounding area. So Ben has the distinction of having worked on the crisis response for Canada's two largest natural disasters. A little bit about the Center for Crisis and Risk Communication. At the CCRC, we believe that every time there is a crisis, you have an opportunity to lead. We are passionate about helping organizations prepare for, respond to, and not just survive, but thrive from a crisis. Okay, I'm going to start with a stat from the US Small Business Administration. That's that 90% of businesses could fail within 2 years of a crisis. And no, you're not a small business, but you are operating in this environment. Your students, your faculty, your staff, that's the environment that we could be living in. This stat was pre-COVID-19. We don't know what it's going to be like after, but that is an example of the very difficult situation that we are dealing with now. I'd like to introduce you to the senior advisor on our advisory board, Dr. Vincent Cavello. Dr. Cavello received his Bachelor of Arts with honors and his Master of Arts in Neuroscience from Cambridge University in England. He also received his doctorate from Columbia University in New York. Dr. Cavello is a nationally and internationally recognized trainer, researcher, consultant, and expert in crisis, conflict, change, and risk communications. Over the past 25 years, he has held numerous positions in academia, government, including Associate Professor of Environmental Sciences and Clinical Medicine at Columbia University. Prior to joining Columbia, Dr. Cavello was a senior scientist at the White House Council on Environmental Quality, a study director at the National Research Council, National Academy of Sciences, and the director of the Risk Assessment Program at the National Science Foundation. Dr. Cavello has authored or edited over 25 books and over 75 published articles on risk assessment, management, and crisis communication. As I mentioned, he's the senior advisor on our board. His work informs everything that we do at the CCRC, and we are extremely grateful and thankful for his participation with our center. A little bit about the other people that we work with. Dr. Peter Ryan is a professor at Mount Royal University. He's on the board also of the CCRC, as is Dr. Chasten Remillard. He's a professor at Royal Roads University. We are supported also by Dr. Athena Madden, also at Royal Roads University in Victoria, and Dr. Timothy Coombs, who's a professor at Texas A&M University in College Station, Texas. We are also supported by Dr. Jennifer Wallinga, who's a prof at Royal Roads University. That's who we are. That's some of our team. And we'd like you to know that everything that we do and every suggestion that we are going to make today is guided in science and research. Okay, if you remember one thing from today's presentation, please let it be this. High stress, high concern situations change the rules of communication. Spoiler alert, we're in a very high stress time right now. All right, we're going to have a look at the agenda. This is what we're going to run through today. We're going to talk to you about communicating in high stress, high concern environments like we're in now. We're going to share with you the core principles from the science and research, most of which is from the people that I just mentioned. We're also going to share the 7 rules for high stress communication. And then we're going to do a real-time exercise. We're going to ask you to define your values and look at how we can manage your reputation. And then we're going to talk about next steps. Okay, let's take a look at the science and research behind high stress communication. Here's one of the high stress communication core principles. As I mentioned, it is a science-based discipline. Everything we're sharing today is based on numerous research studies, many of them conducted by Dr. Cavallo himself. Our goal is to help you communicate more effectively with your students, your staff, your faculty members, or any stakeholder that you might have. The coronavirus pandemic has disrupted lives around the world. It's caused heartbreak, it's caused massive economic hardship, and it has caused a lot of stress. A lot of stress. If we want to do more than survive, if we want to thrive through these times, we need to remember and apply the core principles of high-stress communication. Let's take a closer look. The first thing you need to know is that when people are concerned or upset, they will have difficulty hearing, understanding, and remembering information. In a perfectly calm state, the brain can remember and process, on average, up to 7 pieces of information. That's why your phone number was originally 7 digits long. Before we had to put our area code in when we called people, there was actually a lot of brain research done by the telco companies in the 50s and 60s around this. That's why your phone number was originally 7 digits. In high stress or high concern situations, the brain can only remember and process, on average, up to 3 pieces of information. That's why you're only asked to remember 3 numbers to call in an emergency. Another core principle: when people are concerned or upset, they want to know that you care before they care what you know. Empathy in high stress situations is not a nice to have. It's a critical imperative to connect with your audience. The 26th President of the United States said it best, Teddy Roosevelt. Nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. Okay, I'm going to throw it over to my colleague, Celine Richter, and she's going to walk us through the 7 rules of communicating in high stress, high concern environments. Celine, over to you.
Thanks, Jeff. Ben, can you turn my video on? There we go. Hi, everybody. Such a pleasure to be with all of you today. I never have any trouble giving a group of highly educated, smart women some insights on how to thrive during these high-stress times. So we're very grateful for the opportunity. Rule number 1 is simply be kind. Research tells us that in high-stress situations, if the first line of your email, if the first words out of your mouth is not something that conveys empathy, you could lose over 80% of your audience immediately. So rule number 1, despite the stress surrounding us and impacting us as well, we need to think not of ourselves, but of others. Of course, that works in relationships too, right? Your partner comes home 2 hours late for dinner, covered in oil and grease. They were going to bring dinner home and they're asking about dinner. Well, if the first thing that comes out of your mouth is, "What? Why are you late?" or anything critical, instead of, "Hey, Are you okay? Then you have the opportunity to move on in a positive direction with that conversation. And it, of course, comes to mind, in order to be kind, you need to know what kindness means. You need to know what matters most to your audience. So that's rule number 2. Know your audience. Do some extra homework during times of high stress. What are your students, what are your faculty going through? What are your staff going through now? What feelings, experiences are they going through that you need to be mindful of? That's what they're bringing to the conversation. So know your audience. And before you think about what comes instinctively out of your mouth, stop yourself and think about what kindness and exceptional service means to that audience. That will help you win their trust, their respect, and certainly their loyalty as well. Rule number 3, be concise. We know this instinctively, but the science here gives us some clues on what that exactly means, how big that window is of communication opportunity in times of high stress. Here's what the research says. In high stress, high concern situations, you have 27 words and 9 seconds to make 3 points before people start to tune out. Perhaps a lot less than you thought. It is quite a small window. So keep this in mind when you're responding to those tough questions from students, faculty, staff, even if you're on the media hot seat. Keep those down to a short level, and you'll deliver your message in that window of communication opportunity. Rule number 4, beware the negatives. So as Jeff was saying, our goal here is to inspire our audience to move towards a positive direction. In high stress and high concern situations, the research tells us that negative messages stick much more easily than positive ones. That's the negative dominance theory. So to help your audience keep the spirit of your conversation, your communication positive, make sure to share 3 positive points for every negative point you need to make. It keeps things moving in a positive direction. Rule number 5, watch your body language. Under stress, our brains instinctively tap into body language, and we actually consider that higher on the list than the verbal messages we share. Those cues are critical, the cues that convey trust and build trust. Think of the eyes, the hands, and the face. Make sure your face tells the same story as your words. If you have great news to share, your face should be bright and open, talking about that positivity. Try to convey a sense of eye contact. Look up towards that camera on occasion. Hopefully we'll get back to in-person meetings soon, and looking up to your audience to convey that connection, that human connection that we so need to build trust. And your hands, where are your hands when you're communicating? Imagine you're holding a large beach ball. That's about the distance apart that conveys a sense of openness to your audience, and it will help reinforce your value of connection. There is a lot coming at all of us these days. A study by the Annenberg School of Communication out of the University of Southern California, their School of Communication study said, on average, people consume 63 gigs of data in a single day. So that is actually equivalent to 10,000 times the complete works of Shakespeare. Now, that study was done before the pandemic hit. So imagine, I can only imagine how high those numbers are now. The point is this: we are communicating already in information overloads environments. So when we actually do communicate, think of this rule 6, be clear. Don't add to the mental noise. Being clear might mean making sure you have something of value to your audience to say before you communicate, and be very concrete when you're discussing things. You don't want to add to the mental noise that's already out there. Reading level of your audience on average drops 4 grade levels. So you're not dumbing it down by being simple and clear. You're helping them to digest at a time of high stress and high concern. Being clear also means that simplicity and anticipating those answers to the questions your people are asking. Your stakeholders want the ease of quick answers to their questions. Give them that effortless experience, and you're going to win their loyalty. You're going to win their respect, and you're going to win their trust. That's what you need in times of high stress and high concern. Clarity means to us something else. It also means staying in your lane. It's easy to let the pandemic steer us off course of the messages we need to share. Don't let that pandemic steer you off course. When you do need to talk about the pandemic, don't get caught trying to be the health expert unless you obviously are a health expert. Find your trusted source on the pandemic and refer people to it. So that's the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention in the United States. Internationally, the World Health Organization, and in Canada, the Public Health Agency of Canada. So what is in your lane about the pandemic? Feel free to talk about what you're doing to protect your students, your employees, your colleagues from the pandemic risk. They're going to want to hear how to social distance in your space, how to save money, probably, given the uncertainty around finances. Let them know the extra things you're doing for your community that addresses their needs, their fears, and their concerns in these difficult times. So that's in your lane. And that brings me to rule number 7. Be prepared. We often see people communicating at the podium and they look polished and they look clear. Don't be misguided. Those people have prepared, and you can too. Being prepared means you spend time in advance of any conversation, any open forums, any emails you respond to. You anticipate those questions ahead of time, and you prepare clear, compelling, concise answers that begin with empathy so your audience can digest them quickly and easily. Being prepared means you can bring your best to the game, to the table. People will understand you more easily. And when you look at if anything is actually moving towards a media opportunity, there are 77 questions from Dr. Covello's research. The 77 most commonly questions media will ask in any crisis. You can have that list. Feel free to email us, and we will send that over to you, no charge to you. We are absolutely happy to share that insight with you. And also, being prepared means being aware that the decisions you make in stressful times will have a huge impact on your reputation and the trust you have with your audiences. So now I'm going to hand this back over to my colleague Jeff, who's going to talk about this, managing your reputation in times of high stress and high concern. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Celine. Okay, we're going to move quickly. We've got a lot of material to cover. I'm going to treat this like the master class. As Celine said, we'll have time. You can reach out to us afterwards. But I'm mindful of your time. I'm going to move quickly through this. I want to start with this stat. This is from the Edelman Trust Barometer. Edelman's a PR agency based out of Chicago. They work internationally. They do a lot of research and a lot of polling. This is from their special report on brand trust during the coronavirus pandemic. Came out at the end of March. 81% of people expect brands to do the right thing. Spoiler alert, your institution is a brand, and that's critically important to manage that. If you think you're not under the microscope right now, you're mistaken. Okay, I want to talk about values. I want to talk about your own leadership brand values and that of your organizations. Your values should really be like your North Star. Like the sailors of yesteryear when they were lost and the clouds cleared, if they could find the North Star, they knew they could get home. I'm going to ask you, all of you right now, we're going to do an exercise in real time. What do you stand for? What's important to you as a person, your values, and what's important to your organization and their values? What do you stand for? If you haven't thought about this before, I'm going to bet that a lot of you have. But if you haven't thought about it before, we're going to do it right now. Okay. Pull out a pen and paper. I'm old school. Pull out a pen and paper. Draw a line down the middle. On the left side, I'm going to ask you to define your leadership and brand values personally to you. Write down a couple of words that pop up to you. On the left is your own leadership and brand values. On the right is that of your organization. I'm going to help you. Here are my personal brand values. The first one is kindness. I only know how anyone's day has gone. I only know how my day has gone. I don't know how anyone else's day has gone. Maybe there are people that are having financial challenges, relationship challenges, work challenges. I don't know. It's critically important for me to show up in a kind way. Now, don't be mistaken. That doesn't mean I'm treated like a doormat or I let things slide. Kindness will drive me to have some very difficult conversations with people that are colleagues or friends, even family. Kindness drives me. That's critically important that I show up that way. Also, integrity. It's critically important for me to have integrity in everything I do, whether it's a business dealing, whether it's personally. That means if I'm going to commit to do something, that I bring my A game, I prepare, I do the best I can, and I show up as best I can. That's integrity for me. And I'm going to group the last two together, professionalism and respect. Those are both critically important to me as well. At all times, I'm going to strive to be professional and respectful in every interaction I have. It's also a boundary that I lay down with my colleagues, with anyone I interact with. If I feel that you're not being professional or respectful, I will let you know, and I will lay down that boundary. Those are mine. Those are my own personal leadership values. Okay, I've got a word cloud here. If you're having trouble, if it feels like it's pulling teeth, this is just a word cloud to help you, again, on the left side of that piece of paper, your own personal leadership brand values, and on the right side, your organizations. Ideally, the two are the same. If they're not, we've got some managing to do. All right. And the next slide. Even during a worldwide pandemic, our values are critically important. Now is not the time to jettison our values. You can see lots of examples of this being done around the world. I'm not going to mention them here, but you can connect the dots on what I'm saying. During a crisis, We don't jettison our values. We actually double down on them. That's what guides us through. All right, I'm a big fan of keeping it real. I'm going to give you a couple of real world examples of organizations that took actions that demonstrated their values, some positive, some less so. I'm a big sports fan. I live in Calgary. I cheer for the Calgary Flames. During the pandemic, this is a tough one for me to share, but I'm going to call them out. During the pandemic, the Calgary Flames came out. The NHL canceled their season. They had about a month left, which is roughly about 10 games in the NHL. And they said, we are immediately laying off all part-time employees. We will not give them any bridging to anything. They're immediately laid off. The Winnipeg Jets also made the same announcement. To put this in perspective, part-time employees are often students, people working 2, 3, 4 jobs. They're hard workers, they're bootstrappers. These are the people really working hard in life to get by. Both the Flames and Jets said, no, we're not doing anything for them. It took them about 2 days to walk that back. And an incredible example of being tone deaf and out of touch with the communities that you live in. Alberta as a whole is not doing that well economically. It's pretty tough these days in the province. It's pretty grindy. These two organizations said, you're on your own. It took them about 48 hours to walk it back. I posted a couple of times on Facebook. I called them out early. They did walk it back. The Winnipeg Jets even doubled down. They held 2 press conferences to say they weren't going to do it, and then they did it. I'm going to give a shout out to the Edmonton Oilers, the great rivals of the Calgary Flames. The Edmonton Oilers got this right. Out of the gate, they said, we are actually going to pay our part-time workers for the remaining 10 games. You're not going to lose a shift. We're going to bridge you to employment insurance so that you have the money. You've got some time to make decisions for your own life. Great example from the Edmonton Oilers of an organization, same environment as the Calgary Flames. They got it right. They did it right. Remember, 81% of people expect organizations to do the right thing. Great job to Edmonton. Okay, another quick example. These are 2 distillers. One was in Alberta, one was in North Carolina. They obviously made alcohol and spirits. They retooled quickly after the coronavirus outbreak when there was a shortage of alcohol, hand sanitizer. These 2 organizations quickly pivoted, retooled their operations, and adjusted to providing hand sanitizer. Great awareness, great insight into what their community needed, great demonstration of their brand values. By the way, they got great PR and media coverage. Now, that's not why we do anything, but when we live our values, when we're able to act on them and demonstrate them, typically good things happen. The next one's a little pub here in Calgary called Kaylee's. I put this in to give you an example. It doesn't have to be a big thing that you do. Small things matter too. So Kaylee shut down when everything was shut down during the pandemic. When they opened back up, they said, and they capped it at 150, so they are a business. They said for frontline workers, healthcare workers, anybody that is providing service and is at risk during the pandemic, you get a free pizza. Just call in. We're not gonna vet you. Just call in. Let us know your name. Tell us you're a healthcare worker, frontline worker. You get a free pizza. They capped it at 150 pizzas a day. Awesome. Great job, Kaylee's. For the rest of us, they said, you know what? Our pizza's great. We're going to sell it to you for $10. So an example, again, of an organization doing the right thing, acting on their brand values, very in line with the community in which they live in. Okay, the next one, I'm going to give a shout out to 3M. In full disclosure, I worked for 3M early in my career. I have a lot of respect for their company. Fun fact, 3M stands for Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing. During the pandemic, the President of the United States came out and ordered 3M not to ship any of their N95 masks to Canada or anywhere else in the world. He said, no, you can't do it. I can't imagine the political pressure that would have been, but that's a ton. 3M, to their credit, stood up to that and said, no, we're going to honor our agreements. We're going to honor our written contracts. We're going to honor the supply chain. And by the way, that's how we conduct business at 3M. We honor our agreements. They withstood that pressure. They sent their N95 masks up to Canada and around the world and honored their commitments. Great job, 3M. I'm going to ask you, what do you think their brand values are? Additionally, when they found that they had a retailer that was selling their N95 masks for 5 times the retail price, they immediately issued a cease and desist order. And then when that retailer didn't stop, they sued them in court because they were selling their product at 5 times the retail price. They were gouging. 3M actually took action to make sure that anybody associated them with it was conducting themselves in an appropriate manner. Great shout out to 3M. Okay, we're going to do another real-time exercise. My son, Harrison, goes to school at Concordia. I'm a tuition fee paying student. I'm not picking on Concordia. He loves going there. I have a question, as does every parent across the country. Why are tuition fees not going down when students are not physically coming back to school? You don't have to crank the air conditioner in September. You don't have to turn up the heat in December. Just people aren't there. The costs have to be going down, don't they? Why are my tuition fees not going down? And by the way, if you haven't been hit with this yet, you probably have, but you're going to be hit with it hard in August, probably mid-August, and for sure September. So that's the question. So let's deal with this in real time. Okay, we're going to come back to rule 1 that Celine talked about. Be kind. Show empathy. By the way, when is it hard to demonstrate empathy? I'm a big fan of keeping it real. When is it hard to demonstrate empathy? It's hard when we don't particularly like the organization or frankly the person that we're dealing with. As humans, that's harder to go to that place of empathy. I get it. We have to start there. We have to start there hard. So we're going to be kind. Out of the gate, we're going to respond to my question, the question of every tuition fee paying parent in this country. We're going to start with empathy. So if you are a post-secondary institution in Canada and you get this question, here's where we start. We don't have to worry about the wordsmith. I want to make the point of empathy. We know these are incredibly stressful and difficult times for families, especially financially. That's where we start. Celine talked about knowing your audience. Who are we talking to? What are they going to want to hear? What are they going to want to hear from us? What do they need to hear from us? We'd like to sincerely thank our students and families for your continued commitment to education and learning during this unprecedented time. Students and their families and your staff and faculty are making a decision to continue to put themselves, frankly, at risk by committing their time. You're eventually going to come back to letting students come back to school. They're going to want to know some things. Know your audience. Continue with that empathy. Okay, we're going to be clear. And I put this together. Feel free to plagiarize this shamelessly. You can change the words. And we're going to, I know we're covering a lot today, but this is a Cavello rule. It's called the rule of 3. If you're making an argument, make 3 points. It comes back to the number of pieces a brain can process and remember. The rule of 3, it's called. At the best post-secondary institution in Canada, insert your institution's name there. We believe everyone has a right to learn and work in a safe, clean, and respectful environment. I threw in respectful because that brings in a little bit the Black Lives Matter movement, the societal movement around how much money police departments deserves, the training, etc. That's why we brought that respectful environment in. That's why the safety and well-being of our students, faculty, and staff members is our highest priority. When you go to safety, and it needs to be not just something you say, but something you do and act on as a value. When you go to safety, it's very tough to argue against that. Okay, point 2, that's why at the best post-secondary institution in Canada, we've actually increased the amount of physical cleaning we are doing at all of our facilities. I don't know if that's true, but I'm going to bet that you're doing more than we currently know right now. We've also increased the technical capacity for all of our departments, Zoom, Microsoft Teams. There's probably a lot of work going on in all of your IT departments. Let's share that. Let's be transparent about that. There's a lot of stuff going on so that online learning can continue in a safe and secure manner. I want to know that my son is safe when he's online. I want to know that he's not going to get Zoom bombed. I want to know that that is a safe space and community for him to be learning in. Finally, point number 3, we've made a decision at the best post-secondary institution in Canada to freeze tuition for the rest of the year. I don't know if any of you are raising tuition. I'm going to bet most institutions aren't. So if you're not raising them, then let's turn that around. Make it a positive, proactive action benefit. If you're not raising tuition, you've made the decision to freeze it for the rest of the year. We don't have to make this for years out, for the rest of the year. This is an action you're taking that's got a positive benefit. Let's reframe that. Okay, and finally, we're going to wrap up. We want to thank you again. Who are you talking to? Your audience, our students, their families, staff, faculty, for your continued commitment to the best post-secondary institution in Canada. One of the best places to learn, grow, and develop in the country. We've demonstrated empathy. We've known our audience. We've followed the rule of 3 in making our argument. We've been clear. We've been concise. And we didn't wing it. We prepared. Okay. Quick recap. Remember the one thing I asked you to remember, please. The rules of communication change when people are stressed. They absolutely do. Be kind, demonstrate empathy, just like we did. Know your audience. What are they going to want to know? Put yourself in their shoes. Be concise. This is not the time for, and this is a technical academic term, for anyone to have blabbermouth soup for lunch. Be concise. Beware the negative. Celine talked about the 1 negative equals 3p. That's a Cavallo theory that's well researched. He would even say that if you say 1 negative thing, you might even need more than 3. It's a lot. Be very mindful. We want to be positive as leaders. Leaders are positive. We don't rip people down. We build them up. Watch your body language. Celine talked about that. Watch your eye contact. Watch your facial expressions. Watch your hands and watch your expression and your pace. Be clear. Okay? We don't duck things as leaders either. In crisis communications, we're clear. And be prepared. Don't wing it. Nobody. I know Ben, who's the associate faculty at Mount Royal or at Royal Roads University, is always telling me not to use absolutes. I'm going to use one here. No leader that has performed well in a crisis has ever wung it. We need to prepare. Okay, we talked about defining your values and managing your reputation. So we're going to wrap up here with this. I have 2 calls to action for all of you. Put your values, your own values, and you can put that of your organization or institutions. Put them on a 3M Post-it note. Put it beside your phone. Put it beside your computer. Put it on your corkboard, your whiteboard. Keep it there as long as that 3M Post-it note will hold out. And I'm going to ask you that you look at that, quickly glance at it. Every time you make a phone call, before every time you make a phone call, before every time you send an email, before every time you have a meeting or you talk to someone. Challenge yourself. Am I living up to the values that I took the time to write down and that I really want to adhere to? Okay, and the last one, when you have an important communication, and you're going to know when this is, when you have an important communication that you have to send out, you've got the time to prepare, I'm going to ask that you run it by someone. Run it by, as Brene Brown would say, run it by someone that's earned the right to be at your table in life, someone that you respect, someone that you know has your back. Run it by them and ask them, look, what are you picking up? How am I coming across? And be open. Listen to their feedback. Now, that person could even be us. I'm going to leave open the offer to everyone on this webinar. If you would like to reach out to us directly, we would love to talk to you. If you want to run anything by us, please let us know. We don't normally do this. In fact, this is the first time we've ever done this, but these are our personal emails, personal cell phone numbers. We are passionate about crisis communications and communications in general. As I said off at the top, at the Center for Crisis and Risk Communications, we believe every time there's a crisis, you have an opportunity to lead. We're passionate about preparing organizations for, helping them respond to, and not only surviving, but thriving through a crisis. I want to thank all of you for the time you've taken today. It has been an honor and a privilege to present to you the Senior Women Academic Administrators of Canada. Thank you again to Donna for reaching out. It's been a pleasure to work with Donna, and I want to thank my colleagues for their work and support during this presentation. We're gonna open it now to Q&A. I'm gonna ask my colleague Ben Morgan to step on with Celine and I, and we'll do the best we can to answer your questions. We will stay online for a bit. Again, we're gonna keep this slide up. If you have anything you want to run by us, please reach out. We are here to help. Okay. And Ben has put a number of resources. Ben and Celine have put a number of resources to help you. You can reach out to us in the chat box. So if you can see that, that's great. Donna, maybe I should start with you. How did we do? Do you have any questions or anything that we missed? I know we went through it quickly. I talked with Celine and Ben and you, and we prepared somewhat of a master class. So I know we touched on a lot of things. There's a ton of research and further things that we could talk about, but maybe just ask you, did we leave anything out? Is there anything that SWAAC would like us to address further?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank all of you for participating and partnering with Senior Women Academic Administrators today to discuss this really important topic. I know at first blush, some of this information seems very obvious. However, in those crisis moments, it's this obvious information that we lose so quickly. And so these suggestions about 3 positives to 1 negative, the amount of information somebody is able to receive, and how we communicate that effectively and really adhere to our values and having to define our values, I think is a really important message that can't be given enough. And so thank you so much for doing that today. As mentioned, the resources that we've talked about will be available to those of you who've registered for this webinar. We've had a couple of questions. The first one is coming from Barbara Kelly, who I am going to invite her to ask the question, and then we'll return to some really good questions that have been posted in the chat, and we will finalize at 2 p.m. So Barbara, over to you.
Barbara, yeah, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Yeah, apologies. I'm not sure what happened. I didn't ask a question, but my name is coming up. But I would be very interested in the question that's posed on the board. What advice do you have if communication has already been botched?
So why don't I start, and then I'll throw it over to Ben and Celine. It's never too late. Okay, the worst thing we can do is throw our head in the sands and hope it goes away. Crossing our fingers is rarely a good strategy. So it's never too late. The instinct would be to own it, right? So let me give you a quick example of that Barbara, and I'm going to come back to remembering, or come back to the point of the brain can only process information under in high stress, high concern environments. I botched the name of the organization we were presenting to at the beginning of the presentation. Do you know how many times I rehearsed this week the Senior Women Academic Administrators of Canada? I was walking around all week saying that, and then was super excited about presenting, and I botched it. I stumbled out of my mouth, and it's a great example of, and to Donna's point, while we think things are obvious, under stress, our brain functions differently. So if something has been botched already, let's take a pause. Let's get back together. Let's own it, and then come out as transparently and with integrity as we can. That does mean some planning around it. That does mean owning it, and that's not a natural instinct that we humans have, is to own up to something that maybe we wish we had done better. So that takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of courage, frankly. But that's what I would suggest out of the gate. Maybe I'll throw that over to Ben and Celine if you have anything you'd like to add.
Certainly, I can add to that. There is actually lots of evidence in research and case studies, not from Covello's research, but from corporate communications research, that in fact, times where we've botched it are actually a greater opportunity, if we handle it well, to win trust, not just of the people we've lost, but the people we never even connected with in the first place. So I would argue that the first thing that we need to be able to do is show up as a leader, is to realize that when we have made a mistake, we own it, but we need to take that deep breath ourselves and be hopeful about the opportunity there is to repair that relationship. It's not about a single message, it's about a relationship with that audience that you're needing to repair. And not being worried about making sure you're understanding how you have decided as a team you want to show up, and being clear about following those rules of clarity and being brief, but show up with that empathy and humanity. The time when I started in this business over 20 years ago, corporate speak was running rampant. Now, we want to hear those authentic, yes, clear and careful, but we need to be authentic. Then we have that chance to build that repair. So I just wanted to add that to the answer. Ben, you have way more crisis experience and experience to add to the table that would be relevant.
Oh, I think you guys nailed it. And I love that word you used, Celine, about authentic. My Twitter handle is Daydow Morgan, and Daydow loosely translates to authentic. I would actually challenge you a little bit on that word botched. I'm big about measurement. So based on what measurement are you deciding that communication has been botched? What does botched mean? I suspect it means it didn't go as well, or perhaps had some negative outcome that wasn't necessarily anticipated. So I might suggest that if it didn't go as well as you had planned or hoped, that maybe there wasn't enough preparation ahead of time. So to Celine and Jeff's point, circle back, own it, and be prepared for it. We have a great tool that Dr. Covello developed. It's called a message map. The message map helps build out that 2793 formula. And I would always have a message map built out to help me move forward with my communications. But it's absolutely, what is the desired outcome? How have we prepared? And what are we going to do for moving forward?
So I'm going to thank you very much for those answers. I'm going to share, we're coming close to the end of our time. So before I continue on with the rest of the questions, I want to thank those of you who've joined us this afternoon. And if you have any further questions or would like to engage, you've got the email addresses there, and you are familiar with SWAAC's email address to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to get back to you. For those of you who are interested in staying on for a few more minutes, and you're welcome to do so, I believe our presenters would be willing to take one or two more questions. But for those of you that do have to leave us now, thank you very, very much for joining. So the first question that I'd like to pose to each of you is, came from one of our guests today. How frequently do you suggest you communicate during a crisis, and particularly as a crisis lingers, such as COVID?
So I'll take this one, and then I'll invite my colleagues to come in, because I'm passionate about this, Donna, and I think you and I talked about this before. It's a crisis communication best practice to not have the leader of your organization be the primary spokesperson. We want to save the leader for the very important, high-level, impactful communications that need to happen and will happen from any organization. I'm going to give you an example here, and I make no comment on anyone's politics. I don't care how people vote. I do care that they do vote, but I don't care how. So the Prime Minister during the COVID crisis was on every single day, even on weekends, briefing. And in my opinion, that's too much. I think all levels of government, frankly, did a very good job handling COVID. There's lots of things to learn, but I think in general they did a good job. But the leader of the organization should be saved for important things. So as an example, on the very minimalist side, the Queen of England typically has a couple of times during the year when she would speak. Queen Elizabeth has an Easter message. She has a Christmas, New Year's message. There's a couple other times. She doesn't speak that very often during the year. Outside of those times, she has only spoken, I think it's 4, might be half a dozen times, on occasion since she was coronated as queen in 1952. So that's an example of being very, very careful about how you communicate. Now that's on one side. And the other example is Prime Minister Trudeau, who was on every day for an hour, and I know my TV's on all the time. It just became, and I checked this in with my friends and colleagues, people start to tune out, right? It starts to lose that gravitas. So we want to find that balance, typically between, yes, there are times when we need the leader of the organization, and it is very important that she or he come out and address things. But if that person becomes the day-to-day spokesperson, A, they have a day job to do, which is running the organization. But B, we're going to lose our audience a bit, and we're going to lose the credibility for dealing with the big, heavy stuff that we need to. So that's my view on it.
So I'd just like to add to that. So there is no recipe for enough, but good corporate communication, good crisis communication, follow those same rules, keep those lines of communication open. So there's good two-way communication, so that not the only time that you are addressing the audience is in your media briefing. That wouldn't be enough. You want to make sure that there are other places and ways that the interested parties that have a voice in this, that you have those lines of communication open outside, that you can connect with them. Because the amount of times you have to actually take it to a media briefing, you'll know that based on the feedback you're getting, the questions, how many phone calls are coming in from the public, what kind of emails are getting posted, watching your social channels and seeing where there's confusion, and give that clarity when you can, and go back. So there is no 100%, but paying attention to those signs that there needs to be another opportunity. And another thing I'd just like to bring up, because I think, I know in my experience, I've done some work with other universities in the past, the respect and for the integrity, the privacy of people. One of the things that we need to really be mindful of in times of high stress and high concern, as per Dr. Covello, is if you're addressing a big group in a huge Zoom meeting, or if you're addressing a forum of people where there's people in the same room, a very small percentage of those people will actually take the mic. And I don't have that number at hand. But in times of high stress and high concern, that number is so exponentially small, you will not know whether you have those issues unless you're giving places where people can safely air their questions and concerns. So you need to go out of your way to provide those anonymous emails, those places where people can safely raise those questions that can get addressed formally if they don't feel safe to air those. And it's likely that they won't feel safe. So assume that and see how you can protect people to ask those questions.
So I believe on that note, we've ended our time available today. Again, my sincere thanks to the Centre for willing to partner with us today to offer this really important workshop. The contact information is available here, and our contact information is available in the registration email for Senior Women Academic Administrators of Canada. My sincere thanks, Jeff, Celine, and Ben, for hosting us today. And thank you to all of you who stayed beyond the time limit. Thank you very much, and we wish you all well and safe and health. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Donna. Thanks, everyone.
Stand by.
So the webinar has ended.
I was rubbing my nose, but there's no slide to advance. I didn't realize I was.
There's still 11 participants there.
Hello, hello.
We still have time, Donna, if anyone.
Yeah, let's go ahead and I don't have another meeting till another few minutes. I can certainly take a few more questions.
One question, it sounds like there's a few more people still on. One question that came up in the, and maybe I'll add to the question and elaborate on part of the response and then invite each of you to maybe contribute. One question came up in the chat directly to the panelists was the idea of using the word respect and tied to Black Lives Matters, and whether you talked about values and the need for alignment in the messaging. This is a really particularly important example because the public, your stakeholders, your community members, your faculty and staff, nobody is fooled by performative measures. And so that's the very first place that you're going to get called out when you're using respect, but perhaps not showing it in other ways that are beyond performative measures. So I'm not sure whether you can comment on that, but definitely it was raised in the questions, and it is a really important example given the need for universities, for post-secondary institutions to step up in terms of anti-Black racism on our campuses.
Yeah, for sure, Donna, and all. This is a very big separate topic, and I kind of skimmed it, but my point being there was that it's important that when we communicate, we're aware of what's going on around in our community, and as we know, that's a the societal change that's happening right now is happening to all of us. So I put respectful in there, and it requires a much deeper dive on this. But I want to know that the institution my son's going to, and I put all post-secondary institutions in this category, that it is respectful, that it is honoring to people, that it is honoring to all people, that it is honoring to Black people, African-American people, Indigenous people. So that word respect, and again, that's one of my values, is respect. That encompasses a lot for me, but that is a much deeper dive. My intention was not to, that's something that we obviously, and you're absolutely right. And I did we talk about this before? And I'll share this example. We have a colleague and a friend in Vancouver who was part of an improv theater, and they put up in support of the Black Lives Matter movement that black square on Facebook and social media a couple of weeks ago that they had it, and they were called out on that because their actions had not aligned with supporting the Black Lives Matter movement, and that theater disbanded within 2 weeks. There was such such acrimony and distrust and a lack of integrity, it disbanded. So I asked my friend Dan if I could use that example, and he said for sure. So you're absolutely right. You nailed it. We can't just give we can't just touch on it in anything less than an integrity filled way. So
I do have one. I don't consider myself an expert on race relations, but the training that I've had to date is the principle that I've taken forward that I would apply and recommend that everybody apply to their communication going forward to be careful, is our intent when we are communicating with people with diverse audiences. Our intentions are not as important as the impact we have. And the only way that we will know that our impact has been one that is positive is by having those conversations with people and being humble and showing up authentically and openly, ready to adapt if what we're hearing is that our intentions were not aligned with how our words were received. So that would be the global advice that I would give everybody in this space, and it's a good first step.
Thank you, everyone. We are definitely ending now. It's 12:10. My sincere thanks for those of you that stayed 10 minutes after we ended, and to our panelists once again. Thank you all.
Thank you.
thanks, Don.